I'm going to be reading out today aloud to this sped-up rendition of film in question, 1996's Andersonville, directed by Frankenheimer for television. I'm going to be reading out the first 4 published reviews to IMDb because these were quite close to the film's actual airing, and I'm curious as to how people felt about the film closer to its release date. Let's begin. From Quinn-5 on the 10th of December 1998, they give it 9 out of 10, a Civil War morality tale. Andersonville is John Frankenheimer's most pivotal step in his quest to regain a perch on Hollywood's A-list of directors, and he's in true Frankenheimer form in this latest of TNT Civil War-oriented miniseries. Quite simply, it's about a group of Union soldiers and their span of a year doing hard time in the most infamous of southern prison camps, and one of the most infamous of prison camps in recorded history, Andersonville, Georgia. Andersonville, the prison, is literally a fenced-in cesspool of humanity. It's grossly overcrowded, there's not enough food to go around, and there's no shelter from the heat or cold. The creek used for drinking water is the same used as a latrine by the camp's entire population. And on top of all of this, there's a vicious gang of marauding prisoners that prey on their weaker counterparts, taking their clothing and what little food they may have for themselves. I began watching this film expecting a smaller, tamer, less original version of The Shawshank Redemption, and at several points you'll think likewise. We witness acts of both harsh brutality and stirring compassion, and follow our heroes as they decline physically and struggle to succeed morally, but the period setting and the freshness of the subject make it appealing more often than not. What's interesting about this big-budget, well-hyped production, though, is that the entire cast are relative unknowns, the lead role being held by a young Broadway actor named Jared Emick, whose acting demonstrates he is just that, a Broadway actor. He projects his voice and overemphasizes words as though on stage, and when a dramatic monologue is in order, his facial contortions rival the worst case of constipation one can imagine. The length of Andersonville is a problem, as after a while it just runs out of stuff to say and appears to be chipping away at the minutes until the conclusion. After all, how many scenes can one sit through of watching deteriorating men rot away in sheets of rain or stifling holes in the ground? Look for a deliciously vicious role by Frederick Coffin as the evil prison gang's leader, and William Sanderson as his cowardly right-hand man. There's also a small role by William H. Macy as a Confederate prison inspector who discovers the camp's horrors and condemns it. Great score by Gary Chang. Next we have from PM Fan on the 31st of May 1999, finally the Civil War, Down and Dirty. The movie Andersonville was one of intense drama. The historical subject matter made the film all the more pertinent to society today. Man against man, brother against brother. That is what the Civil War was, and Andersonville was its worst. Men treating other men like animals in game for sport. The utter despair. The terrible suffering. Andersonville is set during the Civil War in the South, in a prisoner-of-war camp run by the Confederate Army. The story depicts the conditions of suffering that the Union soldiers endured while held captive. The best and the worst of humanity is shown in this film as the viewer is shown on all ends of the spectrum of pain and suffering. Peter Murnick's character, Limber Jim, was the voice of conscience in this film. Jim was the one who finally stood up to the injustice that other Union soldiers were enacting against their fellows. It was Jim who rallied the troops to a riot to stop the raiders from continuing their carnage. Not a single Peter scene went by without the viewer sensing the intensity. He portrayed it in his face, in his demeanour, and most of all in his eyes. In this film, Peter said so much without uttering a word. The look he gave in his eyes told the viewer the intensity of his feelings, his determination, his desire to see the wrongs righted. In a sense, Limber Jim was one of the saviours of this film. His standing up to the injustice he witnessed and lived through enabled his fellow prisoners to also rise up and change the world around them, as small as it was. In spite of the fact that this was a film and an artistic production, the real Andersonville shone through. The viewer came away knowing the despair that the Union soldiers felt and lived. There was no question that humanity as a whole had been wronged by the cruelty that took place at Andersonville. The human race came away from Andersonville worse off for having realized that we could fall so far from the very civilization. We pride ourselves on creating to treat other fellow human beings the way the Union soldiers were treated. Andersonville actually existed and does so today as a federal park and tourist attraction. This movie is a very good link in telling the tale that so many never got to tell. The actors, staff, and crew of Andersonville did such a magnificent job that anyone seeing this movie will know what it was like to have been there. They will know the suffering, the pain, the disease, the despair. The cast and crew are to be applauded for their efforts. In his bio, Peter lists Andersonville as one of the projects he is most proud of, and well, he should be. He did an excellent performance and is to be commended. It will go down as one of the favourites of his fans. Once again, Peter's genius comes shining through. Very nice. Next from Yen Lo on the 8th of December 1999, perhaps the best of the TNT films. Generally, these TNT original productions are nothing what one could call spectacular. This film from John Frankenheimer, however, is one of the better ones, a tale of imprisonment and survival inside the notorious Confederate POW camp known as Andersonville. Civil War historians would probably with certainty find various historical inaccuracies, but it is worth viewing, although it had on the long side. Good performances from many of the cast, but it seems Frederick Coffin and William Sanderson do the best job as two of the ringleaders of the camp's vicious raiders gang, a must-see for any Civil War fan. And finally, we'll give a readout to Gettysburg 2000 Go, on the 7th of March 2001, a 10 out of 10, without bias. As a practicing Civil War reenactor, I have found myself drawn into viewing this movie several times. I considered the movie to be the result of a very thorough and extensive research done by its creators. Everything was completely in accordance with what we in the reenacting community call of the period. I'm speaking of authenticity. I have studied the true-life accounts left to us in the words of both Union and Confederate soldiers, found in excerpts from the pages of their personal diaries, and in so doing, I have been able to combine this newly acquired knowledge of other experiences and studies related to this time period in our nation's history. After doing this, I was then able to formulate unbiased opinions about the movie. We have to remember that the people of the middle 19th century were men and women just like us. There was nothing mysterious about their ways, their words, their fears, and all their other emotions. I felt that these natural human reactions and outlooks were well portrayed by the actors of the movie Andersonville. And I think we'll close it here. Thanks again, everyone. I appreciate it very immensely.